Welcome to today's episode, The Madness of Alcohol Duty in the United Kingdom. Alcohol exists in many different and delicious forms, but as far as the government is concerned, it's forever 1974. Men drink beer in pubs, wine is an expensive luxury, and sparkling wine is drunk by people who wear white tie when eating at home. In this episode, we'll show how in just 3 years, wine drinkers began paying 50% more for their alcohol than beer drinkers, how a cheap £5 bottle of fizz is subject to an eye-watering 70% tax rate, equivalent to fuel and cigarettes. If you like drinking wine, I promise you will not be happy with what you're about to learn. This is Show Don't Tell, so let's get into the numbers. In the UK, only fuel, tobacco and alcohol are subject to duties, that is, taxes beyond VAT levied on certain products. Unlike VAT, alcohol duties are independent of the actual cost of the product. Whether you pay £5 or £500 for your wine, the duty will be the same. In this episode, we're going to focus our attention on the large inequality in duties between different alcoholic drinks. There are two main approaches to taxing alcohol. The first is rates based on the level of alcohol, which applies to beer and spirits. Adding even an extra milliliter of alcohol means more tax due. General beer duty is 19.08 pence for 1% alcohol in a litre, so your average pint attracts duty of 45.5 pence. The other method is rates based on total volume, which apply to wine and cider. Alcohol levels are defined in broad bands, and within each band there is a flat rate applied per amount of total liquid. For wines between 5.5% and 15%, that levy is £2.89 a litre, or £2.16 for your standard bottle of wine. In 2017, alcohol duty raised £11 billion for the government. But how does that break down? Well, here are the four main types of beverage. By simple volume, beer is the most consumed. However, beer has less alcohol. So to make things equal, let's assume wine is 12.5%, spirits are 40%, and cider is equivalent to beer. Then we can compare by volume of alcohol. Beer remains the most popular way of consuming alcohol, with a 15% higher contribution than wine. Spirits is third, and cider is marginal. But here's where it gets interesting. How much revenue does each category contribute? Well, it isn't beer that contributes the most, it's not even in second place. Wine is the drink that contributes the most, and not by a little bit. Wine drinkers contribute an additional £850 million, despite the fact that wine contributes less to UK alcohol consumption than beer. Putting the numbers together shows that for every unit of alcohol you consume from wine, you will pay 44% more tax than if it was consumed from beer. And frankly, wine duty is not very far off the tax rate applied to spirits. This disparity between wine and beer is very much a recent phenomenon. If we index the rates to the same starting point in the mid-90s, you can see there have been three main phases of alcohol duty in the UK. There's a fairly steady increase between 1995 and 2008. There's a steep increase from 2008 as the above-inflation duty escalator was implemented, and from 2013 the disparity emerges between taxes on wine and the taxes on beer. Because you see, wine is different. There are breweries in the UK, there are cider makers, there are distilleries, but not many domestic winemakers, which means a likely difference in the amount of pressure applied from industry and MPs about their respective tax levels. In 2010, we had a new government that continued the steep duty escalator increases for 3 more years from 2010 to 2013. But in 2013, the Chancellor at the time decided that maybe there was some opportunity in this.
I intend to maintain the planned rise for all alcohol duties with the exception of beer. We will now scrap the beer duty escalator altogether. And instead of the 3 pence rise in beer duty tax planned for this year by the previous government, I am cancelling it altogether. That's the freeze people have been campaigning for. But I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to cut beer duty by 1 pence.
The 2013 budget, which affected the 13-14 tax year that's on the right of this table, created the largest single-year disparity. Let's look at the impact by assessing the change in headline duty, volumes, and actual duty collected. Headline beer duty decreases, whereas wine continues the steep increases of previous years. The result was that people drank more beer and less wine, but with lower duty we saw an £80 million decrease in beer duty collected, despite an increase in consumption. And even though wine volumes decreased, there was a £176 million increase in the amount of duty collected. And as far as I'm aware, not one single person complained or said anything. Given the lack of any negative consequence, let's move on to the 2014 budget.
Today I'm scrapping that escalator for all alcohol duties. They will rise with inflation with these exceptions. Scottish whisky is a huge British success story. To support that industry, instead of raising duties on Scotch whisky and other spirits, I am today going to freeze them. And with some cider makers in the West Country hit hard by the recent weather, I'm going to help them too by freezing the duty on ordinary cider too. And then there's beer. I know the industry, led so ably by my honourable friend for Bulletin, have been campaigning for a freeze. But beer duty next week will not be frozen. It will be cut again by 1 pence.
So what was the impact of the 2014 budget? Well, it's the same story as the year before. Headline beer duty reduces, headline wine duty increases. The same story repeats on volume and duty collected. Beer duty collections fell by £30 million. Wine duty produced an extra £124 million, again on lower consumption. Collections were helped by the shift towards sparkling wine, which attracts a 30% higher tax than still wine, as we'll discuss later on. The question for the government became, how much longer can we play this game?
Today I am cutting beer duty for the 3rd year in a row and taking another penny off a pint. I am also cutting cider duty by 2% to support our producers in the West Country and elsewhere, and to back one of the UK's biggest exports, the duty on Scotch whisky and other spirits will be cut by 2% as well. Wine duty will be frozen. I am freezing beer duty and cider duty too. Scotch whisky accounts for a fifth of all of the UK's food and drinks exports, so we back Scotland and back that vital industry too with a freeze on whisky and other spirits duty this year. All other alcohol duties will rise by inflation as planned.
I suspect by this point you understand how the game works. Beer taxes have a benefit, all other taxes have a benefit, wine never gets the same benefit, and who actually seems to care? If we look back to 2012, wine and beer delivered similar revenues to the government, and the duties levied on them were also broadly similar. But today, wine collects £4.1 billion versus £3.3 billion for beer from that increase in headline duty. If we look at the volumes, you can see that wine has not actually increased in consumption over this period, but the amount of tax paid has increased by £800 million on the same volume. Just a staggering increase in contributions from taxpayers that has been pushed unchallenged for so many years. And then we pull the lever on the political fruit machine, all the reels spun around and we get new faces. In 2017, we got a new Chancellor who decided not to play the game for another round.
And I can also confirm that I will make no changes to previously planned up ratings of duties on alcohol and tobacco.
And the effect of that statement is to maintain the differential rate of taxation. It's not going to narrow, it's simply going to continue into the future. So why do I find this fascinating? Well, I don't think that consumers should be punished for preferring one product over another. Without there being any health or environmental consequences, what is the rationale for the government enforcing its preferences onto its own population? But the really interesting angle is, who are the wine drinkers of this country? At the risk of broaching the rocky shoals of gender politics, ONS data shows the answer is women. Women drink wine more than men. It's women who pay most of the cost of this unfair taxation. £4.2 billion of wine duty where they drank less but had to pay more. I find this a fascinating contrast to campaigns like the tampon tax. In a whole year, a woman pays £1 in VAT on her tampons, and marches and banners appear on the street to make it £0. But apparently there is no complaint with paying £3 in duty for a single bottle of sparkling wine, 55% higher than beer and 3% higher than the tax on whiskey. And of course it's not exclusively women who are affected, but no one is out there saying, just because UK manufacturers don't make my preferred drink, why should I be the one penalised for that? Sparkling wine really deserves more focus. I find it incredible. There is actually a difference in tax between sparkling wine and still wine for the same alcohol content. People say you can't tax air, but that's a challenge already beaten by the people behind alcohol duty for having fizz in your drink that's almost an extra £1 for a bottle of wine. And if we take this table from the Institute of Fiscal Studies, we can see what that means. The low underlying cost of wine makes it already proportionally higher tax compared to beer, but if we add on the extra tax for sparkling wine, a £5 bottle of sparkling wine has 70% of its price as tax, which you can see from this table is about the same level of tax you pay for fuel, and on packs of cigarettes costing over £10, similar to cigarettes too. If you buy 4 £5 bottles of sparkling wine, £14 of your 20 will go to the Treasury as a result of your apparently aristocratic way of life. It's just a mad level. And that brings today's episode to a close. My view is you should not be punished for your choice of drink. It's not up to you where it's made, who makes it, or how powerful their connections are. If you prefer wine over beer, there's no difference in any health consequence, so why should you be paying 50% more for that alcohol? It seems to have been driven entirely by political opportunism, as it's such a lucrative and unchallenged form of income as people like drinking wine. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is Show Don't Tell, and I'll see you next time.